Okay, hello. So the title of our symposium is called Inbetween Worlds, and the title got me thinking about my own practice, and I've always felt that my artistic practice has been in between the worlds of the digital and the physical. So I started off as a painter, and when I was making paintings, I kind of wanted them to look like they were made on screens. I then moved on to artist films, and I wanted to give them a sort of painterly quality. Um, I've now moved on to 3D design and working with code, and I started thinking, what is the theme that runs through all these mediums I've been working with? And I think that one of them is the use of systems. So I just want to briefly talk about the benefits of being in between these two worlds and what it's allowed me to do within my own practice. So a long time ago, I found this little booklet called Computer Liberation Dream Machines, and it is self published by a person called Ted Nelson, and it's basically the first book written about the personal computer. He sort of wrote and published and distributed it himself, and it basically is composed of two parts: the computer liberation side, which advocates for the political necessity for people to understand computers and how they work. There's a quote that really stands out: is "You can and must understand computers now, because they control and influence so much of how society is run and organized around the computer, and by not knowing anything about that, you're essentially giving up control over your life to these computers and systems." And the second half of the publication, Dream Machines, talks about what are going to be the potential benefits of the personal computer, and we can see that on the impacts on education and culture that computers have had. So, for example, Wikipedia. In the 70s, when Ted was writing the booklet, he was anticipating all of this, and it's all sort of come pretty true. Um, he had a sort of counterculture mentality that sort of feeds into things like the open source movement. So the idea that software should be free and accessible to anyone, peer-to-peer networks like file sharing, the early days of Twitter, so sort of like handing over a way to talk to anyone in the world. That sort of idea of information wants to be free. And his ideas helped turn the internet from a tool used by the military industrial complex, like a private sort of network, into what the internet is today. So, how Ted Nelson's ideas have impacted my own practice is through realizing that throughout my whole practice I've been applying a sort of computer logic. So when I was making paintings, I would often set up in my mind a system that I would use that would dictate how the painting would evolve. So often using dots or repeated lines, I would say I am going to start at X point, and then do a ring of dots around that, and then grow that, do another ring, do another ring, do another ring. And so that system then, depending on how many dots or the colours I was using, would dictate the outcome of the painting. So I wasn't predetermining the look of the painting that I was making. I was instead creating a system in my mind, and the system would then essentially build the painting for me. And by changing variables, so changing how many dots or where I started the dots or how many starting points there were, would dictate the outcome of the painting. And this logic, I've subsequently realised, is essentially the same when you're programming with code. So instead of creating a certain outcome, you build a system with code that then, through the computer, reads that code and builds the outcome that you want. So an example of one of these systems would be this work that I started with a number of start points and would do the initial central circle, and once that circle was completed, I would then go the next level up and draw the outsider circle, and the particular shapes of these and the relationship between them builds up and influences the other one until at the end the final composition is finished. And I didn't know that that was how the painting or drawing was going to finish. It's just by running through the system you then arrive at a final endpoint. I wasn't really conscious of what I was doing until I started working with Blender, making 3D graphics. And there's a part of Blender that you can use called geometry nodes that helps you create 3D models. So instead of directly sculpting a 3D model in much the same way you would if you were a sculptor, you can instead create these linked up systems that procedurally create the models, and it allows you to, one, change the geometry at any point, and also allows you to create amazingly complex compositions. And it follows this same idea of, instead of directly creating an outcome, you instead create a system that then builds the outcome for you. So when I really became aware of myself using systems was when I started looking at code. And code works exactly in the same way that I've been talking about, where you create a system through variables and functions and different elements, and then this system runs through once or over the same time, and it creates the conditions that result in the final piece. So an example of this would be this program here that takes the text and constantly analyzes where the mouse is, and it draws the text at the same location of the mouse, and using a random number the colour is selected. So I've not decided the colours that the text and the outline will be at specific points. It's the conditions within the program that dictate the outcome of what the piece looks like. And how this all relates to Ted Nielsen and computer liberation, dream machines, is that it's allowed me to open up new avenues that I wasn't aware of before for creating new visual media. And by understanding a little bit of how computers work and how code works, it's allowed me to create complex imagery that I wouldn't have normally been able to have access to. And there's a little QR code on the screen now where you can go to my website and see more examples of the sort of digital work that I've been making recently. So yeah, thank you very much.